When I was in middle school, I was always in the principal's office. I got good grades, but I couldn't sit still. These days you might say that I had ADHD or something, but I was just part of a group of boys that was very active. We loved sports. We'd always have a pickup game of baseball or football, and we would play anywhere that we could. We would play on the cobblestone streets. We'd play in the back lot of someone's parents' store. We would even play on the railroad tracks that ran through underground Atlanta. Now, I love sports, but I was small, so I never really thought I would have much of a future in them. And I think that's how I got into boxing. You see, I started out in amateur tournaments at the boys' club, and then in 1947, I started boxing in the Golden Gloves tournaments. In 1949, at the age of 18, I was named Georgia's Golden Glove flyweight champion, and I went on to the National AAU quarterfinals, won my first bout. I lost my second. Out of 36 fights, that is the only fight that I ever lost. I probably could have gone pro, but after that, I went into business, and I gave up boxing. My family was they'd immigrated from Rhodes, the island of Rhodes and Turkey. And they were part of a growing Sephardic community down on Central Avenue. And when I was growing up, I couldn't get away with anything. We had so many aunts and uncles living within a couple of blocks of us. Anytime I tried to do something mischievous, a family member was sure to see me. When I would talk about my childhood with friends from my youth years later, we would always say, we have come a long way from Central Avenue. Growing up, I always thought that we were lower middle class, but I have come to realize that I grew up lower class. For an example of that, when we would go swimming at the boys' club, none of us could afford swimming trunks. So what would we wear instead? We wouldn't. Just swim in the buff. My father, he was a shoe repairman, but he got Parkinson's very young. So my brothers and I, we stepped up and we worked to take care of our family. It's just the way that it was. And I had a lot of jobs. I sold shopping bags outside of the richest department store for a nickel apiece. I sold chewing gum outside of City Hall. I had 2 different paper routes before high school. And I worked for many years at Uncle Nace's Deli down on Auburn Avenue. When I was in Georgia State, Benny Galanti asked me to manage his grocery store. And then a few years later, he sold it to my brother Morris and I. So I had to drop out of Georgia State for a while, but eventually I did go back, and roughly 8 years and 2 kids later, I graduated with my degree in accounting. After a stint in the Army, I came back to Atlanta, and we opened up a few additional stores, and then we got into the real estate business. And do you know, I ended up owning a part of the richest department store that I had hawked grocery bags or shopping bags outside of. So, a long way from Central Avenue indeed. Now, people have said that I'm a man who cannot say no. And that was only possible because of my wife, Gracie. Thanks to her love and support, I was able to do many things in our community, including become president of our beloved Orve Shalom, as well as the Men's Ort and the Jewish Community Center. I was also chair for the Israel Bonds for the state of Georgia, and I was commander of the Jewish War Veterans Post 112. We also offered our support to many incredible institutions, such as the Ben Massel Dental Clinic, Camp Marie Benator, and the Benator Early Childhood Training Center. When I became the president of the Bedford Pines Boys Club, I told the director that I felt that I had a debt to pay for all that that institution had given me as a boy. Now, when I was a kid, I didn't just get from the Jewish community. I got from the total community. So when we as Jews say we have to make sure that the Jews are taken care of, I think we have to do more than that. I think it is our responsibility as Jewish people to take care of the wider community. I really do. So speaking of serving our community, I would like to introduce people who have not only served our community, but also our country, the father-daughter veterans themselves, Stephen Greenblatt and Evelyn Greenblatt. Am I saying that right? Stephen Greenblatt and Evelyn Greenblatt Howren. Yes, here they are, folks.
Evelyn, look at this.
Dad, what in the world?
Your Grandma Bela, packed it for me when I went off to fight in the Spanish-American War.
She packed you a hard, moldy bagel?
Well, it wasn't hard and moldy the day she stuffed my knapsack full of them day I left for Cuba.
Grandma sent you to war with bagels.
Well, what else would a good Southern Jewish mother pack for her war-going son? I guess we ate most of them, myself and my fellow officers and soldiers in Company A, but when I came back from the war in 1899 and emptied the knapsack, would you believe I found this one lone survivor at the bottom of the bag? 8 months of war in a tropical climate, and this beautiful Jewish delicacy survived.
Well, thankfully you did too, Dad.
It was quite the adventure, that war. Of course, you've had a few adventures yourself, haven't you, sweetheart?
I have. Not that you and Mom didn't try to stop me from going after them.
Well, you can't blame us. Pursuing a pilot's license wasn't exactly a normal thing for a Southern Jewish woman or any woman in the 1930s to do.
Yes, Mother's greatest ambition for me was to sit on a cushion and sew a straight seam.
Well, you do know how proud your mother and I were of you when all was said and done. Your service to our country, you might not have seen combat, but you served your country all the same.
While World War II might have been strictly a man's war on the battlefield and in the skies, I was able to actually log 3,000 hours of flight time, training and ferrying planes and training other pilots, which freed our military airmen up for combat. I ended up testing over 30 different types of aircrafts, B-17s, B-24s. That's more than most servicemen get to. Of course, there were some men who didn't like it because it hurt their egos, but I still think women make better instrument pilots. Our touch is more delicate, and therefore the plane responds beautifully.
The hands of a pilot. Were you really only 24 when you were called to serve in your first class with the Women Air Service pilots?
Only 5 years older than you were when you enlisted for the 4th Tennessee Volunteer Infantry and headed off to war.
Hard to believe, isn't it?
We have had a lot of adventures, Dad, haven't we? And then we came back and we both started businesses.
It might have been a bit more exciting to run your own flying school than it was to be the laundry king of Atlanta.
No, the American Laundry Company was a huge success, and it allowed for us to have everything our family could have ever needed. Remember all those picnics out on our patio at Briarcliff?
I could taste my home-brewed corn whiskey now.
No matter how far I went or what I accomplished, I never forgot where I came from.
Your mother and I were so happy when you came back to Atlanta after the war.
I know you were. You were so happy that you bought me a plane, which allowed me to become a municipal flight instructor, which led to me meeting Butch and starting
that would be her
Flyway.
future husband, Hillman Butch Howren. And then, eventually, we both could officially call ourselves veterans.
Well, how would you know that? That happened after you died.
Oh, I know. I know that in 1977, when you and those other brave wasps were able to, were given honorary military discharge, you were finally given veteran status and all that entailed.
We did. Thankfully, we did. Like father, like daughter, huh, Dad?
Indeed. Want to buy it?
Oh, Dad, please.
Our next luminary, some of you may be familiar with.
Beloved community leader and philanthropist, Erwin Zaban.
I was always very lucky. I tell people that I was a member of the Lucky Sperm Club. Well, the thing is, I was a terrible young kid. Really, if my father hadn't gone into business, I think I might have ended up at Sing Sing. I was just a terrible child. But when my father went into business, I wanted to be of help to him. It kind of thrilled me that my father was going into business for himself. So when I was a teenager still, I quit school and joined him at Zeb Manufacturing Company. Now in 1948, Dad decided he didn't want to run the company anymore. So I inherited the business when I was still in my 20s. And there were only about 8 to 10 salespeople. Well, it eventually expanded into a worldwide corporation. And then we merged with National Linen, becoming National Service Industries, and we became a Fortune 500 company. Oh, you know, when you go into your father's business, it's like starting out on second base, not like starting at home plate. You're already halfway around. Well, my father, he was involved with community work, particularly in the Federation. His job was collecting past due pledges. So, of course, he made a lot of people mad, pushing them for money. But I was very influenced by him. And my children, I believe, were influenced by me. I'm very proud of that legacy. I'm proud of all 3 of my daughters who have continued the tradition of Jewish communal work and philanthropy. And did you know, yes, thank you. And did you know that my daughter Laura was the first lady president of the Jewish Community Center? I was 18 when I started working with the youth organization of Federation. And then, at 34 years old, I co-chaired the campaign. That was in 1955. We raised, $600,000 to $700,000. We thought we were something. Well, much of my involvement happened through the encouragement of my peers. It was Barney Meddens who asked me to get involved with the Jewish Community Center, and others got me involved with the Jewish Home. It was always hard for me to turn down friends who were passionate about something, even if it was something I didn't really have an interest in. But all of it was a wonderful experience. I think of all the organizations I was involved with in the community, the one that I feel most connected with was the Jewish Community Center. I guess because it serves all segments of the community and all ages of people, from 2 months old in the nursery to almost people who are near dead. So it really serves a great purpose. Yeah. Well, in 1973, Zaban Park came about when Max Kuniansky said to me, "Erwin, we need to have a campsite." He said, "There's 50 acres of land out here in the country." That was the country then. And it's going for $1,000 an acre. So I gave them a donation in honor of my parents. And then later, we bought 5 more acres for that original small building. And quite a while after that, we held a capital campaign for the current building. At the time, our goal was, I think, $48 million. We raised $52 million. I also contributed quite a bit to the Jewish Home Zaban Tower and to the Zaban Night Shelter at the temple. That was all Alvin Sugarman's idea, you know, the couples shelter. Thank you for Alvin. Interestingly, I was never president of the JCC, the Jewish Home, or the temple. I don't know whether it's because they didn't like me or whether I turned them down. I can't remember. They told me that Harry Major used to say that I was the godfather of the Jewish community. And Steve Seelig called me, he said, "Erwin is the architect of the 20th century Jewish community in Atlanta. Well, I don't think I'm that unusual. We do what we feel we're supposed to do. And I always just enjoyed the fact that with whatever success I had to give back. I wanted to give back. And now, I want to welcome someone who has given back a lot to our community, cardiologist and women's health care pioneer, Dr. Nanette Wenger.
Thank you. If I were to take this stethoscope and blindly listen to a person's heart, I couldn't possibly tell the race of the person. I may, however, be able to discern the person's gender. Yet throughout most of the last century, heart disease was considered strictly a man's disease. Of course, when I saw my female patients, they suffered from heart disease just like their male counterparts, even though they weren't in the textbooks. I eventually discovered that women were dying from heart disease more often than men, and came to the conclusion that cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in women in the US. I was born in New York City, and in 1954, I became one of the first women to graduate from Harvard Medical School. Several of my family members were in medicine, and it seemed fascinating to me. Science was enticing to me, but I also liked people, so going into medicine seemed like the perfect marriage. Speaking of marriage, it was my husband, Dr. Julius Wenger, who was the reason I came south. He was enticed to come to Emory as one of the first gastroenterology specialists in the Southeast. Now, I had never been to Atlanta before, but I made an agreement. I would try it for a year. As you can see, it's been a very long year. I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I came south. I had never lived in a segregated society before. Like many people, I had a set of values that I was not ready to breach, which drove some of my misbehavior when I came to the Emory School of Medicine in 1958. You see, I was based at Grady Memorial Hospital, which at the time was called the Grady's, because there were two. There was the white Grady on one side of the street and the black Grady on the other side of the street. It was built as a segregated facility. Everything was separate and duplicated. Everything. I was absolutely shocked. Well, as chief of the cardiac clinic, I addressed all my patients as Mr., Miss, or Mrs., regardless of race. That was against the rules, and people reported me for it. So I spent quite a lot of time in the hospital superintendent's office. I refused to do what Southern Convention required, and so that got me into a bit of trouble before desegregation took hold. Now, my husband and I, we became involved with a number of the leaders of the civil rights movement, and I'm honored to say that both Martin and Coretta were guests in our home, as were some of the other members of the civil rights movement at that time. We were very proud to know them and to support them in the limited way that we could. I've also been fortunate to be involved with a number of Jewish organizations in my life. I was the first female president of the Atlanta Bureau of Jewish Education. I was an officer of the Jewish Community Center and president of JELF, the Jewish Educational Loan Fund, where I still sit on the Application Review Committee. My work in the field of women's heart health and my 50-year involvement with the American Heart Association led to their giving me their highest honor, the Gold Heart Award. And just last year, I was both proud and humbled that they named a new award in my honor, the Nanette K. Wenger Award for Best Scientific Publication on Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke in Women. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Thank you. My passion for medicine remains strong, but my focus has changed. I now understand the importance of advocacy. I believe it's another responsibility we physicians must assume to help our patients and give them every opportunity to live a healthy life. Thank you for your attention and tribute to the doctor that I'm portraying sitting here right here. It is now my pleasure to introduce architect and civic leader, Cecil Alexander.
You know that song from South Pacific, "You Got to Be Carefully Taught"? Well, I don't think those lyrics are true, that you have to be taught to hate. I think we're born hating, I really do. I think you got to be taught to love, and I think that's what civilization is all about. Now, most of my life, I expected the best from people. I was often disappointed, but I always kept coming back at it. Now, my ancestors are some of the first Jews in the South. My father's family came to Charleston, 1760, Atlanta, 1848, and me, well, I was born here in Atlanta, 1918. Grew up on St. Charles Place, that area now known as Virginia Highland. I went to school at Marist, Boys High, before starting college at Georgia Tech. I always wanted to go to art school, but my father said, "Oh no, you'll starve." Well, after 2 weeks of a chemistry course, I said, that ain't for me. I transferred to architecture. Ended up getting my degree at Yale. And I had just started graduate school at MIT, 1941, when I got invited to a dinner in New York where I met a Jewish couple who had escaped from Berlin. They were telling us all about what was going on in Germany with the treatment of the Jews, and that was it for me. From that point on, I didn't care about academics anymore. I wanted to fight Nazis. I enlisted in the Navy, later switched to the Marines. I was stationed first at Midway, then Pearl Harbor, then the Marshall Islands, where I flew 60 dive bombing missions. I want to tell you, I was one good bomber pilot, too. But you know, the older I got, the more horrified I became at the whole idea of war. I just think there's no glory in it at all. And I came back to America after the war, and I was struck by the inequality in our country. I just thought what the Constitution says, it's just a bunch of hypocrisy until the blacks have the same rights and opportunities as the whites. And my wife, Ermi, oh, she was very passionate about the cause as well. We entered the civil rights movement. And I want to tell you, that was not necessarily the safest thing to do at the time. And it was a little career dangerous as well. But you know, I just said to myself, I was over there getting shot at for 18 months. I survived that. Some punk wants to take a shot at me. Well, I've been shot at. I marched in Martin Luther King's funeral procession, served on the King Center Board, and co-founded and co-chaired the Black Jewish Coalition with John Lewis. Served as his campaign chairman on his first congressional run as well. But my most rewarding experiences were when I was able to combine my professional expertise in architecture with my civic interests, such as when Mayor Hartsfield asked me to chair the Citizens Advisory Committee for Urban Renewal in the late 1950s, and when I served as vice chair on the Atlanta Regional Metropolitan Planning Commission under Governor Jimmy Carter. Now, maybe you're familiar with some of the buildings I worked on when I was principal architect at FabRap, Coca-Cola headquarters, the original Bell Tower, South Tower, or maybe the original Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. Now, I was always idealistic about architecture. I thought it could save the world. And my son Doug would say that the people are more important, that the contributions I made to the people of Atlanta were my most significant accomplishments. I don't know, maybe that's true. I'll leave it to you. Let me now bring on, ladies and gentlemen, another luminary who knows a little bit about architecture, Mr. Ben Hirsch.
In 1964, I attended a meeting held by Eternal Life Hemshech. They were discussing plans for a Holocaust memorial. They had already voted on the design, a giant white marble tombstone. I didn't like it much. So I came up with an ulterior plan. And my design for the memorial to 6 million was dedicated 6 months later on Yom HaShoah and remains a place where Jewish Atlanta observes Holocaust Remembrance Day. These are my original plans for the memorial. I kept them displayed in my home until the day I died. I'm going to put them over here for safekeeping. I was born in 1932 in Frankfurt am Main, Germany, 3 months before Hitler came to power. I saw my family's synagogue destroyed on Kristallnacht and witnessed my father being taken away by Nazis at gunpoint. That's when my mother arranged for my 4 older siblings and I to go to Paris on the Kindertransport. We eventually made our way to Portugal, where we boarded a ship to New York. By the time I arrived in the States, my 2 older brothers were already in Atlanta. My 2 other siblings and I were placed with Jewish families through Hebrew Orphans Home. I was 9 years old. My siblings and I didn't talk much about my parents then. The last letter we received was in 1942. We eventually learned that my father had been killed in Auschwitz-Birkenau in October of that same year. My mother, little brother, sister were seen being marched to the gas chamber in 1943. I was a small, wiry kid, but I was very scrappy. I got into a lot of fights, mostly provoked by bullies who came after me because I was Jewish or foreign or both. But I must have been a lot to handle because I went through several foster families in Atlanta back then. When I graduated high school, all my friends thought I would be a commercial artist, but I wanted to be a cartoonist. It's what I enjoyed most. But it was my friend, Abe Israel, who talked me into going to Georgia Tech. He said that it was perfect for me because I was good at math and an artist. And he said when you combined math and art, you got architecture. And I said, what's architecture? I studied at Emory for a while, but I needed more income, and I wanted to go to Europe to find out what happened to my family. So I volunteered for the draft during the Korean War. When I was young, I always wore a kippah because that's what I was brought up to do. And one day, my Jewish elementary school teacher told me that I was embarrassing all the other Jewish students and teachers by wearing it. Well, I didn't listen to her at first, but I eventually took it off because I had a strong desire to fit into my new environment. I even worked hard at cultivating a Southern accent. But when I was in the service, my Judaism became more important to me again. And when I returned to Tech, I looked for opportunities to design religious buildings. You see, I think that's the mark of a civilization, how a people celebrates their belief in God. I designed the Zaban Chapel at Camp Barney Meditz, Orvay Shalom Synagogue, several other religious structures. But I'm most proud of what's in this building. The Breman's permanent exhibit, The Absence of Humanity. I'm most proud that that exhibit started the Speakers Bureau for local survivors to educate teachers and young people through first-person testimonials about the Holocaust. My wife, Jacqueline, said that I could tolerate anything, but injustice, I would have to agree with her. Thank you very much for listening. And now I would like to introduce our final luminary of the evening, straight from the 18th century, no less, Georgia's original Sephardic Jew, Mr. Samuel Nunez.
You see this bag? This bag was my ticket to religious freedom. and later to the New World. I was born Diego Nunez Ribeiro in Portugal in 1668, in the middle of the Portuguese Inquisition. My family were conversos. Those are people who were Jewish, but living public lives as Catholic while practicing their Jewish faith secretly. Conversos were also called marranos. Literally translated, marranos means pigs. In spite of that, I was able to study medicine and became one of the most accomplished doctors in Portugal. However, one Passover, while I was observing the Seder with my family, we were apprehended. Myself, my mother, my wife Gracia, and our children were caught in the middle of observing the Seder. We were imprisoned, and we were tortured. This bag saved us. You see, I just happened to be the physician to the King of Portugal. The Grand Inquisitor also thought that he could make use of us. So we were allowed to go home. However, 2 guards were always stationed in our home to ensure that we didn't practice our faith. While we lived in a beautiful home and were allowed many luxuries, the secrecy of being conversos was untenable, and I began to plot an escape for our family. One night, I held a large banquet, and we had a guest of honor, the captain of the HMS Prince Frederick. At the end of the dinner, I offered a toast that I had learned from my great-grandfather, been passed down. He had escaped Spain during the Spanish Inquisition. And the toast is, salud, y pesetas, y amor, y tiempo para gozarlas. That means health and money and love and time to enjoy them. After the toast, the captain welcomed us on board his ship. And so all of my family, along with our 2 guards, went with him to the boat. We got on board, and immediately we had celebratory cocktails. The 2 guards' cocktails were drugged with opioids from this bag. You see, the captain happened to be a patient of mine, a very loyal patient. And after the guards were knocked out, we tied them up, and we immediately set sail for London. Shortly after we were in London, we joined the Bevis Marcus Synagogue. And there, my sons and I were circumcised. And we changed our names. I to Samuel, my wife to Rebecca. While living in London allowed us to practice our religion freely, I was never entirely comfortable there. And after the loss of my wife, Rebecca, and 2 of our children to illness, I made another decision that altered the course of my family's life. I decided to go, along with 41 other Jewish families, to Georgia, a new colony established by the British in the New World. Bevis Marcus Synagogue paid our way, and on July 11th, 1733, we landed in Savannah, only 5 months after General James Oglethorpe had arrived with the original 114 settlers. We also happened to arrive in the middle of an outbreak of yellow fever. Now, initially, James Oglethorpe did not intend to allow Jews to settle in Georgia. He was afraid that we would scare away the potential Christian settlers. However, the only doctor in the colony had died months earlier. Once again, the bag saved us. He quickly saw the wisdom in allowing us to stay. With a Torah that we had carried across the Atlantic, myself and the other Jewish families formed Congregation Mikveh Israel. That congregation went on to become the 3rd oldest Jewish congregation in the country. And that Torah is still read from today in Mikveh Israel, which continues to thrive. However, in 1740, fearing the encroachment of the Spanish troops and fearing being discovered as living openly as Jews, myself and many of the Jewish Portuguese community members went to Charleston to escape the Spanish. However, before that, I was the first person to practice medicine in Georgia, and I was the first person to set up a pharmacy in Georgia. Later in life, I went to New York to be closer to my daughter's family. Some people say later in life I returned to Savannah. Others are certain that at age 76, I died in New York. The location of my burial is unknown and remains a mystery. In any case, I would like to offer a toast to all of you fine folks tonight. Health, and money, and love, and enough time to enjoy them. Salud, y pesetas y amor, y tiempo para gozarlas. Here's to you. We hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for your attention and your dedication to this museum.
Very well done.
Yes, me too.
Don't let him take me. Don't let him handle me with his hot hands. If you can keep me, I want to stay here with you forever. I've got my man.